Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Central Bank of Nigeria has stated that Nigeria's high inflation would further reduce the value of the naira as imported products become more expensive. This was disclosed by Dr. Omamegbe M. Amo, who is a member of the CBN's Monetary Policy Committee. Central Bank of Nigeria says the country, that's Nigeria, generated 799 billion naira from its oil sector in the first quarter of 2022. The figure represents a 28.3% decline from the 1.1 trillion in the fourth quarter of 2021. While oil revenue amounted to that 799 billion in 3 months, the fuel subsidies paid for within that same period came out to 675 billion naira, about 84.5% of that figure. Now, joining us to discuss further, we're joined by Dr. Andrew Nevin. He's a partner, Chief Economist at PwC Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Dr. Nevin, I have a question for you. If Nigeria was an individual coming to you for personal finance advice, and you see their salary going down by 30%, but yet their spending is up by about, 84% within that same period, what would you advise? What kind of advice would you give to that individual?
Well, I think we can all admit that the situation is not sustainable. I mean, it's just remarkable, the numbers that you just put up. I mean, we earned 799 billion. That's the transfer from NNPC to the Federation account, I believe, in 3 months. And of course, you divide that by 200 million, that's 4,000 naira per person in a quarter. And yet people call us an oil economy. And to compound that, not only is that not essentially nothing per person in the country, we now then are subsidizing oil, 675 billion naira in the same period. So we've really reached the point of zero oil, at least zero benefit from oil in Nigeria. And I think everyone needs to admit that. But I mean, where do we go from here? Well, what would I tell someone if Nigeria was my friend, and it is my friend? Where to start? I think there's a few places to start. One place is just we put out the paper where the country has many dead assets. These are assets that don't give a return. So it would be the same with an individual. You have assets that don't give a return. So you need to create a return from that. Things like the National Theater, the refineries that don't produce oil, Ajaokuta Steel. We're draining resources into these assets with no return. So we need to reverse that as a first step. The second step, I think, is we need to really focus on the FX regime. If oil subsidy has to go, the FX regime has to also be revamped. Those two distortions have caused immeasurable irreparable harm to our economy. I think most people who observe it understand that at this point. So those would be two good places to start.
Thank you, Dr. Nevin. Okay, so you mentioned, fuel subsidies have to go. This is something that, has been said from every corner possible. We got a multiple choice, and we've asked this on our panel discussion we had about a week ago. We've asked every analyst that comes on the show about this multiple choice question, and that is with respect to if you take away subsidies, obviously that's fuel subsidies, the price of fuel is going to go up. So, in your estimate, whose job is it to prepare Nigerians mentally for higher fuel prices after, if and when those fuel subsidies are removed? Is it A, the government? Is it economic think tanks? And I guess you would fall in there at PwC. Is it us here at the media? Is it labor unions, or all of the above?
Well, I think I'm not sure how people would vote. I would say it's all of the above. There needs to be some communication and planning for what is a major change. I mean, this would have been a minor change a few years ago when oil prices were low. We've made it into a major change by delaying it. I mean, we have said at various times the oil subsidies being removed, then it's in effect come back in a different form, and we are where we are. But I think it's all of the above. But let's see what the voters said.
Exactly. Well, we will see what happens soon and when the elections come. Is Nigeria's quest to diversify her revenue away from oil going to take longer than expected? Could it be a multi-decade journey?
Well, we're putting out a new paper that says it doesn't have to be a multi-decade journey. I think it might be a multi-decade journey if we did it in the traditional way. But the path that we're advocating for Nigeria is we need to be exporting high value-added services into global value chains. And there's a number of reasons for that. But we've already proved, I mean, the biggest source of FX for this country is the incredible Nigerian diaspora, which is an amazing force, an economic force, increasingly a political force. But the world has changed technologically in the last number of years, and particularly with COVID. And we now have the chance for people to do the same type of brain work from Nigeria because there's so much more remote work. So what we're advocating is the quickest way, and that's the title of our paper, the quickest way to prosperity is actually to have, and we're putting the number 2 million remote workers out there, 2 million remote workers participating in global value chains in the next 7 to 10 years. And that would address the problem. I think if we went the traditional route, say manufacturing, or we went mining, which is extremely long lead times, we'd find it'd be a long time to turn around the economy. But the thing about these service jobs is a lot less capital be deployed to create a service job, a BPO job, or a coding for employment job. And it can happen much faster. It happens in a modular way. So we really think it's the quickest path. In fact, the best path for prosperity in this country.
Great stuff, and we'll definitely look forward to that paper. And Dr. Nevin, Nigeria has so much potential. It is such a blessed country, but we continually talk about the issues that are facing the economy. And I want to throw another multiple choice at you because, of course, there's an election coming up and all these economic issues. So basically, as far as Nigeria's biggest economic headache, and we took away all of the above because, but anyway, unemployment, is it inflation, oil theft, corruption, lack of electricity, or poverty?
Well, I'm going to give a different answer. Even though I'm not an expert, but I firmly believe the biggest economic problem we're having right now is security. And the reason for it is the security is having incredible knock-on effects around the country. In addition to the great human loss and toll, which is just terrible in this country, it creates a real problem, for example, in the agricultural space. Why are we having such rapid inflation? I mean, we know there are various forces and Ukraine war, supply chain problems, but the biggest thing driving inflation in agriculture is the fact that when farmers are insecure, they change their planting patterns. They plant less hectareage. They don't go far from the village. They stay close to home. They're planting more for subsistence than for sale into the markets. And so that would be the biggest single thing that we could address that would make an economic difference in the short term.
Dr. Nevin, can one be optimistic that all these issues, including security, as you've mentioned, be solved within a reasonable time frame?
Well, I mean, those who follow me know that I'm pretty optimistic over the medium term. And of course, I'm old, so I'm not going to be around that long. So I need to see the change quickly. But I am optimistic. But one thing that really gives me reasons for optimism is so many more things are happening, not at the federal level, but at the state and the local levels. And if you think about it, I mean, we're an extremely large country. Official population, I think, right now is about 216 million. It might have reached 217 million. You can't have one centralized place trying to drive prosperity throughout the country. You need people all over the country driving prosperity. And one of the big reasons for optimism for me is over the last 4 or 5 years, you've really seen a step up in the state's approach to economic and social development, because I think they recognize that the whole federation account approach where they just collected money from Abuja was no longer viable. And of course, today's show where we put up that really pitiful number, 709. I mean, I was shocked at how small it's become, which is essentially nothing that's available in the federation account. The states have started to work for a number of years on their own strategies. I shared a strategy from one of the states yesterday. It's just fantastic what they're doing in that state and the direction they're doing. And people are supporting states that are doing well. So states like Kaduna, Edo State, Ogun State, Oyo, Nasarawa. I mean, the governors are really trying to do the right thing, and they're getting support on that. So I think that gives me real cause for optimism. But again, I'll repeat, it's not possible to have this large a country with the prosperity driven from the center. It can only be done in a distributed, decentralized way.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. I think I heard you talk about inflation earlier, but how do we address Nigeria's inflation problem?
Well, I think there's a few facts. Security, as I mentioned, and of course the global forces that are there. But I mean, the reason if you go to India, for example, which really has about the same GDP per capita, real GDP, not real, but nominal GDP per capita as Nigeria, but you have prices that are 1/3 or 1/4 of the Nigerian price levels for the same goods. And, what's the reason for that? Because their infrastructure is better, because their supply chains are more efficient. So, the issues around ease of doing business, and Dr. Jumoke Pebek is a real Nigerian heroine, as I've said, but we haven't made enough progress on that. It really drives our cost basis up. Everyone knows how expensive it is to do things in Nigeria. So more focus on that. I think the one positive step this week is finally some details around the Orange report. So this is the simplification of the federal government. It really is, not only does it mean the cost of governance is very high, but the complexity for the private sector is also very high when they're dealing with so many multiple agencies. So of course, the original Orange report came out in 2013. His Excellency President Buhari assented to it, I think, in March of 2020. It's only now we're getting some details on the specific steps. So I really hope the next regime continues it. But that's another key development to drive inflation down. But at the end of the day, food inflation, if you think about which basket matters the most, 50% of the people in Nigeria spend more than 50% of their income on food. So what really matters for the welfare, for the well-being of Nigerians is food inflation. And as I said a little earlier, what's going to really drive food inflation down is improved security.
Thank you so much for that. The import dependency, is that another issue that you think can be addressed? How do you think we get that down? Is it improving local manufacturing, for instance?
Well, people might think that, but actually our view is that you want to reduce your dependency on things that are really expensive. And many manufacturing goods are not very expensive. And some manufactured goods in the medium term, we're not going to be able to produce. We're not going to produce mobile phones. We're not going to produce computers, tablets, which are critical for us. And I don't think there's any reason to start down the path of producing internal combustion engine cars. If we're going to produce cars, we might as well produce electric cars, which may be a stretch in the short term. But so what you want to substitute away from is what's expensive. So what's expensive to import? Well, what's expensive to import is health and education. So this country spends, if I understand it, the numbers, I believe these are numbers, probably understatements, but spends at least $3 billion in imports of education and healthcare. Now, what does it mean to import education? It means the Nigerians go abroad to get their education somewhere else. So every time you go abroad and pay for education or healthcare abroad, that's an import for Nigeria, $3 billion. That's where I would focus in terms of import substitution, because that's a very expensive ticket item. And if you can get more people to become educated in Nigeria, more people to have their healthcare, it's going to make a big difference. Of course, linking these things together, it's very difficult when we have the ASU strike. So if essentially the government of Nigeria is saying it's more important to subsidize fuel, which benefits the rich or perhaps other countries, than it is to invest in the young Nigerians. We're fundamentally opposed to that. The economic loss, the social costs and the economic loss from the ASU strike is extraordinary. And unfortunately, I think one of the reasons it persists is we have not been able to put a number on that. That loss, but it's terrible for a young person to see their education delayed. Terrible for the economy because they're delaying the time that they're being productive. But if we really wanted to do import substitution, I would focus on improving the health and education system so people don't feel the need to go abroad for those very expensive services. In terms of low-end manufactured goods, I wouldn't bother at all trying to do import substitution. If other countries can produce them very cheaply, have better infrastructure, better port infrastructure, better road infrastructure, let's accept that for now and focus instead on substituting away from the high value-added things like education and healthcare.
Dr. Andrew Nevin, we really appreciate your time today. Partner, Chief Economist at PwC Nigeria. So many issues to discuss, and we really thank you for breaking them down for us, and we really appreciate your time today.